The strategies are different and driven by some understanding of genuine limits to tolerance. And if you back up the notch, you go back to, okay, well, I'm going to pay attention to administrative and public administrative procedures relative to issues of social equity and justice in making a just city through zoning to the rescue. And I try to string all those things together, and I find myself not knowing whether I should slug them or hug them. And so I guess I put this back to the group we're talking to here today, and I'm going to just give you a case and then just see if it plays out along the panel, and then we'll open it up for everybody to talk. We got a lovely email related to our work in One Region Forward and some of the activities of the Congress of New Urbanism, and lots of guest speakers and experts telling us how it is somewhere else. And ultimately, someone in Orchard Park wrote a kind of very thoughtful note that says, look, we like our downtown. It's one of those areas when we did the scenario mapping, people circled and said, don't mess it up. We kind of leave it alone because it's pretty good. But our tax base is too low to deliver the quality of services our citizens have come to expect. And we have this kind of strict development. You know, and so what's wrong with putting a big box or two out there and actually drawing a kind of bigger tax return for that? Why is that bad? So, over to you folks. One at a time, who wants it? What do we say to our friend from Orchard Park?
I have to pass the mic.
Wow.
Come on, Dan.
Okay.
Yes, Dan, the tape is running.
So I came here this morning thinking, whatever you do, don't say anything stupid. Well, you know, that's kind of a statement that we hear.
The mic is on. That's what I was told it is on.
Okay, it's got a little button on it, the green button. Is that better? Better? Can I just drop it and talk loud?
Hold it up your mouth.
Hello?
There you go.
Oh,
It's working now.
Okay, so that's already violated my first goal for the day. Anyway, that's kind of statement that we hear quite often. Obviously, we folks that live in Amherst, live in Williamsville, do appreciate the place where they live, and they don't often understand what's wrong with it, or what people perceive to be wrong with it. And so, you know, and kind of flip it around a little bit and look at it from our perspective. We look at a place like Amherst, and I suspect Orchard Park may be the same, I'm not too familiar with it, as a place that has a fairly diverse land use base about it. We range from a very dense suburban forms of development in and around the city to rural areas out near the Niagara County border and Transit Road. So we kind of look at it and say we offer a full range of options for folks looking for different places to live, different types of places to live. So, you know, in some ways, I guess we don't see that there's a real problem with the forms of development we have. Are they sustainable in the sense of what One Region Forward is trying to pursue and the region is trying to pursue in terms of conservation of resources and targeting resources to places to make these places more sustainable? That's a good question. We look at some of our areas. In fact, we're about to begin a project where we're going to try and use zoning to make those places like Eggertsville and Snyder and Williamsville more sustainable in the sense that the forms of development there that are higher density, that allow for more walkable types of experiences, can be preserved and can be redeveloped in that form. Sometimes, and a lot of times in suburban zoning, Jason was alluding to earlier, we can't replicate the kinds of development that you see in the city or even in the village of Orchard Park or the village of Williamsville. We can't replicate those with the zoning codes we have because they just don't allow for the higher density forms of development that might be more desirable. So kind of long story short, I guess we're looking at opportunities in our community to kind of accentuate those more sustainable walkable forms of development in communities and continue to offer the choice that people seem to want to have by virtue of the fact that they move to the town and they appreciate what they have in the town. So in our case, I think it's a sense of diversity of choice that people have, and trying to preserve those choices and the range of choices while trying to meet some of these goals of sustainability.
It's interesting the way you responded to that, Dan, because what I think you did was give us a segue into the zoning as to the rescue. You challenged the premise of the correspondence that came to us, which is we think we're as dense as we want to be downtown. And what you presented was there's an imagination of a different kind of density that'll take you to walkable, that maybe means that there's more capacity in that downtown or village center than one can imagine right now. And with the right kind of zoning, you get a new imagination. Does that go to what you were
It is,
trying
and
to
can I,
do?
let me just, yeah, it's, Bob, thanks, that's a good point. And one of the challenges that we have, I suspect folks in Orchard Park have had this challenge, we certainly have had it. We have a big challenge in trying to help people understand what these concepts are. What is high density? What is walkable? A lot of folks think those are worthwhile and attractive things to pursue until they see it in their neighborhood. And then they look at it and they say, well, that's not what I thought it was. Obviously, there's been a couple of examples recently in Amherst, in and around the Williamsville area, where we have a village form that people love and appreciate. It has a lot of the attributes that we've been talking about. Our comprehensive plan says these are places that we want to encourage mixed-use, higher density forms of development, and yet we get a lot of controversy surrounding types of development that are in keeping with those principles. So we find a significant challenge in helping people, or trying to help people understand what those concepts mean. They don't mean the same thing to everybody, and until they're kind of juxtaposed to your home or your neighborhood, people seldom understand what it means.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I
I
wanted
knew
to talk
it.
to you about something. So,
Here we
one of
go.
the things you said was, it really doesn't matter what it looks like. And one of the things you said is, sure does. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I was just going to add there that this gives you a great opportunity to talk about community benefit, right? So what's in it for me? Let's say we get a Target downtown, and there's a ton of people who will say, great, I love that it's something, a big box store has moved in. It gives, I can get to it, I can take the train to it, I can take the bus to it. But what does it do for the community at large? And what does it look like? And what about the surrounding neighborhoods behind it? If it's zoned for residential and then you put in this big box store, we're talking about trash day. What happens on trash day? Are you going to, what happens to the employees when they're not working there? How are they being a good neighbor? What are they contributing to your community, and how are they addressing your needs by bringing in just, someone said these are minimum wage jobs. So what is the impact and what is the benefit to the community? So that's the only thing that I would say from a sort of a community organizing standpoint, is when you see these things coming in, those are the questions that you should ask. What are you bringing in? Okay, you're bringing in this widget. What is it in for me? So that's the only thing that I would have asked, but.
So Jen, if we want to put a big box in Push's 26 box.
Yeah, I think that when you don't, and I think it's a really good example when you're saying Amherst, Orchard Park, I think that if we start taking these zoning laws and green codes and all this other, lines in the sand, and we start really looking at the people no matter where they're coming from and engaging them in the process in general, then the laws and the rules around what happens becomes universal. It's not just the zoning laws on the east side are going to put you here and the zoning laws on the west side. I'd love to know, and I would love to have like this overall unwritten rule that everything that's going to get built, I don't care if it's like a little cottage for a dog park. I don't care what it is. But everybody should have the same standards around, you know, engaging community, making sure they're aware of, making sure those questions that Stephanie asked, which are really good, I wish I was like, big box store, what would I think? And she, you know, what do the people that aren't working get? Yeah, those are great. I love her. But these are the types of things that I think really help to benefit not just the neighborhood, but also gives the organizers in the community and the nonprofits and the folks that are trying to uplift people to have a voice. We don't look like we're just looking for you to give us an apple and we're going to show you how it's done. It's truly like unwritten that, and all we got to do is push the system. Like, there's these meetings that every single time we build anything, no matter what, you have a voice. We're going to help, it's going to be at this place because we know that's open. Like, we're going to do our jobs as organizers to make sure they get to the spot, they get great yummies when they get there, and, get some folks in the neighborhood that have a great voice to talk about it. So that's why, I like this process here. For example, we have a school in our neighborhood in the west side on Normal Avenue, School 77, which I graduated from in 8th grade 5,000 years ago, is empty now. And the city no longer wants to use it. And we have a running campaign now that the residents put together around what's going to happen with that school. Since the city is, now it's open, they don't want to turn it into a school, so it can be anything. In order for us to make sure that it was a community space, because the residents in that community are like, oh God, what's going to come in here next? Is it going to be a big box Target on Normal Avenue, which is definitely not the neighborhood for that. We were told get 500, so whatever together, get some community support. It took us 3 weeks to get 600 cards signed from the community to say that they want to have community development in there of some sort. We don't know what it is. But the moratorium is put in place now that it cannot be turned over without the community support. So this is what we're talking about. This big, gigantic school might be in 5 years. Come check it out. Come check us out September 18th. We're going to have a big public meeting around that. Give us a call. I'll get my cards around. But this is really, what we're talking about as far as community engagement and what's done in each place, to get
really
development
interesting.
happening.
Both of you are sort of bringing us back to the notion of, wait a minute, it's not a hard and fast, this is it. It's whether or not there's a process that will bring us into the conversation where the shared learning occurs and where decisions are informed by those values.
For sure.
So does land use law do that, Joe?
Well, I continue to say that, land use planning is local, and if we look at municipalities like Amherst, that every municipality in Western New York, if we think about, sort of the theory of how people sort themselves through residential decision making, people locate where they get the best services for the taxes that they're willing to pay in the house that they want to live in. And that becomes a challenge because everybody has different choices and has different wants and needs. So at least in the city, as I see it, I think that planning in neighborhoods is inherently a local decision amongst those that live there. I kind of get, Paula's sitting in the audience, who's one of my students, and I've had this conversation with her, but I find it hard for people who don't live in a neighborhood to go into a neighborhood and tell those people what they should or shouldn't do. I just think that's fundamentally wrong. And it's just, it's kind of what the new urbanists did to us last week. They came in and told us everything we did was wrong. And I just think that that's wrong. I mean, where you live is inherently emotional to you, and you want to do what you want to do in your neighborhood without outside influence that tries to prescribe what you should do. So to me, it always goes back to planning is inherently local, and at the neighborhood level, the people that live there should be engaged in that process and engaged in the decision making, and also engaged in administering the outcomes.
Okay, so if it's local and you get to decide in your neighborhood, are there limits to tolerance with regard to the kind of characterization you gave us about there's a place and there's an impact inside and outside? And I want to put that back to voice in terms of where's the limits of tolerance to the kind of assumption in my neighborhood I get to decide if I want a 3-acre lot. I get it.
Yeah. So I think really what it comes down to is sort of Stephanie spoken before is mutual we call it self-interest, but it is sort of what do I get out of it and being able to come to a consensus, right? Because as a community member, obviously lots of times you don't want your community to go in a certain direction, and you're going to try to keep it the way that you want to preserve it forever, right? And then you have people who may actually, have some right to come in or are developing and doing whatever, but you have to look at it as a standpoint like, it is a conversation. We're both at the table and we want to come to a mutual agreement. Now, there are some things that, I'm not going to let a Target or a Walmart come into my neighborhood. But, if I want to, maybe you want to put in a grocery store that will benefit the community, then that's a conversation that we can start to have, right? So it's about coming to a resolution that both parties, can be okay with, and really having those hard conversations and holding each other accountable.
So it's a bigger conversation than just inside.
Yeah, it's a very large conversation, and I think sometimes that happens way too fast, where people just think that they can just throw something in the pot and you're just supposed to let it fly. It doesn't work that way, and that's why you have organizers and people to say, you know what, that's not right, and we're here.
Got it. Okay, we've stirred some stuff up, so go. So where do you start? Who wants it?
Yeah, let's step. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I can add to it, but I might get bad.
We're all
I'll
like,
make it quick because there's so many hands going on. One of the things that folks get afraid of are people who read and understand what's going on, and that everyone who's doing a development, something has to be exposed, right? Because you're getting some sort of tax credit, you're getting something to come in to that store. There's some kind of analysis that said this neighborhood is in desperate need for this, because a business is about supply and demand. So someone created some kind of demand for that service. You need to go where it starts and goes back to policy. Who's your local council member? Who's your local legislator? Who's your person say, hey, do we have any say about what this is coming into our neighborhood? You're a taxpayer. You vote, right? So you can go and say, I don't think this is right. And then you bring your voice and then her voice and then other people and say, we just want to have a conversation. That's all you have to say, is that we just want to have a conversation about what's coming in to our neighborhood. And they probably aren't used to that, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Make people a little bit uncomfortable about what they're bringing into their neighborhood. Sorry.
Can I-
Somewhere in that, there's buried a kind of power map. So
Yeah.
she went to the
Yeah.
food chain, she went to the politics.
Yeah.
The other place is who's the developer making the decision. That's
Yeah.
another place in that sequence.
Can-
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I just wanted to add that you need to know what the process is in your community for big box development. You need to know that when that is processed through your planning board, your zoning board, your city council, whatever the case may be, you need to know that what that process is. Legally, they have to follow some framework to get that to an approval stage. And within that, usually big boxes have a large impact, and that requires outside agency approval and outside agency review. And those agencies, when it's opened up to them, it's generally opened up to the stakeholders and public at large. And you should be able to go to a public hearing and say, hey, I've got concerns about A, B, and C in this project. And Amherst does that better than anyone else.
I would just say, just from a standpoint, I mean, Jen definitely knows a lot more than this. But I think what it starts with, too, is that I keep going back to this, but it all depends on the plans, right? To mix socioeconomic neighborhoods and races, and, that is actually the center of what makes a real neighborhood function, right? To have different income bases, a mix of people, that's what makes it flourish. But when you think about just straight up gentrification, the thing that happens is that it isn't designed in a way to make that community flourish. It's designed in a way that most of the people in the community end up getting pushed out because the tax brackets go up so much and people aren't able to live there anymore. So it's not really protecting the communities, but it really actually ends up pushing them out.
Love this question. So glad this happened. So I don't know if people are familiar with some of the development that Push has been doing, and we're up against this question and this situation on both ends. And I'm to the point now that I don't, even go politically correct and speak my mind about this, because I live in that neighborhood, I'm a member, and the title doesn't mean anything. When it comes to gentrification, in my eyes and in the eyes of the 47 different languages that are spoken in a 25-block area in our particular neighborhood, and when you go to the east side and you have all this vacancy, and all these issues happening, you start to wonder why folks are trying to develop in an area where the development is already happening that is totally core to the affordable housing for people in that community, when you have vast devastation and wasteland not even a quarter of a mile away. Like, this to me strikes another question. I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer the question. I'm actually going to pose one for other people to think about and get conversations going. Everyone else try and think of what gentrification means. Because to me, it's a fire starter for the people in my community who are getting, you know, the developers that are coming in Sneaky Pete-like, and they're buying these houses and then they're coloring them, and they're putting together houses that are definitely not sustainable, energy efficient, and then you get those who do. You have folks who do, that will let the community know, that'll let a developer like Push know, you know, we want to work with you. What houses are you working with? Because Push, we don't just decide. We don't like, here you go, guys. This is a community for you. We have a community development committee. Each and every single apartment that we have to this day is because someone in the community who is a part of this development committee has chosen that particular landmark because it's an eyesore, because it's a drug haven, because it's a vacant lot, because it isn't being used. The community dictates what it is that we do. So we have 50-something properties that are going to get put up. Why? Because 14 people who are the core of this community development committee that live right there in that neighborhood, and then now the entire city is starting to see how this is working. That's how it's done. And when you work with us and say, you know what, we're going to build in this area, we're just letting you know, general rent is $700. I am that Jennifer, by the way. I don't know how to and I damn sure couldn't afford to live on that street, so thank you. But if you really look at the amount of rent that is general right now, and the few scattered houses that were done Sneaky Pete-like, they're $300 to $400 more a month. So what are you trying to do? If you know the area, you know that Richmond is here, you have a mansion and you have a shack. So we're talking about the zoning laws in a whole nother way. So like I said, I don't have the answer to your question, but I'm putting a perspective in there that maybe we should talk about. When people, you know, push, why aren't the developers going to where you can really make a difference and raise some property values and get what you're looking for? Why are you trying to come into something that's already being done?
Note to Bart, we want a panel next time of Sneaky Pete's. And we want a really good conversation.
Can I just be in the background?
Right here, sir. One of the things that, forgive me, I'm an architect and planner. I'm going to take off my facilitator hat for just a minute and say that it's not so much the what, but the how that seems to come through most everything happening. And then who gets to say how, not just what, is a kind of a, depends on how it affects you. And those with the biggest stake are the largest affected and probably ought to have the largest voice. It's a simple principle of democracy that we've come through. Now, lots of questions about personal liberties and personal rights and how all that plays out have to be part of this conversation, and that's a tough nut to crack. That's why the Sneaky Pete discussion is, wait a minute, Sneaky Pete is a well-meaning developer who wants to increase the tax base of the community and do well and make a profit. And profit's probably a good thing in terms of the way our economy drives and something. So how do you think about those kinds of things?
That is one of the conversations that are beginning to, are already having, and there are organizers who are already in the process of having conversations, with community members in the neighborhood around a community benefits agreement to what's happening in the process. But I think part of I keep saying this, but it goes back to conversation. And, I don't want to get into the root of it, but I know in the neighborhood, there's some sort of, some people on one hand think one way about it, and, some people think another way about it. And I think to be able to have a common, open conversation about first directly with the community for them to be able to come together and say like, what they think would be beneficial, and then be able to have a larger conversation with developers and the medical corridor would be very beneficial to the process than just their continual like fighting and starting and stopping. So that's.
Can I?
Go for it. I got another question.
No, go ahead. I'm going to let her follow up. Who had a follow-up?
I was just going to add that I don't understand how, and this is sort of me being critical of administration, but I don't understand how the city of Buffalo, the largest community in Western New York, has planning board meetings at 8:15 in the morning. And if I was a city of Buffalo resident, I would be saying that those should be in the evening, and they shouldn't be for the convenience of the administration and the planning office because they're in the department time. They should be at the evening because you're not making decisions about them. They're making decisions about the community, and the community should have the opportunity to choose between going there and not going to work. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to go back just for a real quick second to the question that you asked about, similar to zoning or what's on the ground. As Jason noted earlier, you've got your planning where the community comes out and does its visioning and searches for some form of consensus as to how it wants to develop in the future. And then you've got your implementation tools, of which zoning is one. So back to your question, get into the zoning code. Don't look at the plan. Look at the plan that tells you what folks thought should occur. Get into the zoning. Go to the zoning map and go to the ordinance and try to understand what that code says can happen on that property from a land use perspective and from the building and the built kinds of form that particular parcel can take. And most codes are older codes in this area. Buffalo's going through a process now, a more innovative approach to zoning, but most codes are use-based, especially in the suburbs, because in most suburbs, I think they're searching for this kind of compromise and this tension between predictability and certainty, okay? i.e. certainty on the part of the community as to what might occur in that area based on their planning and zoning, and predictability on the part of both the developers and the community in the sense of how that process and how that decision will be made. Okay, so think about those two things, predictability and certainty. That's what a lot of communities seek. In your case, you're saying, how do I change that? How do I go about changing the zoning that someone has established? I don't know how other communities work. In our community, it's a process whereby you would come in, you would ask the planning board first, can we change this zoning? Here's what I have in mind. One of the principal criteria that they will use to determine whether or not they should go forward with something like that is it consistent with the comprehensive plan? Does that plan say this is the kinds of things that the community has articulated should occur in that particular area, we'd like to occur in that area? So you need to make sure, in our town anyway, you need to make sure that it's consistent with what the plan says. Okay, that's one thing. You would apply for that. There's an administrative review process that the community undertakes. It's usually a multi-departmental, multi-jurisdictional review. There's comments from all the different folks that have a say in that particular property. And then it goes to the planning board for a recommendation to the town board. And then the town board makes that decision. So
how long approximately would you say that process would generally take?
in our community, you can figure that will probably be somewhere between a 3 to 6 month process, and that's optimistic. It just depends on the scale and the location.
The blowback.
And the blowback, as Jason said.
Yeah, the blowback.
Yeah.
The process is intensive and it's arduous, and they made it that way for a reason, because they didn't want folks in this room and the other 250,000 people to be able to understand how to stop something.
Yeah.
And I also want to say that I want to blame a little bit of our community organizing community, because a lot of times people see them in the corporate world as a Gestapo. They constantly are saying, no, 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 no. And then you have the developer saying, but look, I'm bringing jobs, I'm bringing jobs. Don't you need jobs? Doesn't everybody want jobs? And so the story that we keep telling each other is not making sense. So I think if we can go back to what you were saying, which is money talks, right? We all know that, and everything else walks. So if something's gonna happen, it's going to happen because they have much more resources than you. What you wanna do is when you get there, you can say, well, I'm also a resource, because we can make sure that no one shops at your store because we didn't want this in the beginning.
Yeah.
That loses your demand, that means you're out. So what you wanna do is be able to be at the beginning of the process. And there is a process. And yeah, you might have to be there at 8:15 in the morning, but that's when you engage your seniors who are already retired, and you have them there because they can sit there all day. So you have to figure out a way to make things happen. And the answer isn't no. The answer is, if you have to have this, then this is the way it should look. This is the way it should feel. This is the way it should benefit the greater community. So those are the conversations that need to happen, because if that hotel comes, the question is, if they already put the money in and the board is moving forward and it's coming in, then now you need to come from a different standpoint and say, if it's coming, then what's it going to be for this community?
Yeah.
Can we make sure that you don't have cars coming in and out of the neighborhood at a certain time? Can you do something with lighting, traffic, whatever? What can you do for us? Can you give us new sidewalks? So on and so forth.
Yeah.
Oh, I think someone.
All right, all the way back.
Well, a quick comment.
I said interrupt.
Sorry.
I mean, I think
I'm
we're
sorry.
probably on the same page.
Oh, no,
so
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to say, I just want to talk a little about the organizing standpoint, is that organizing is not for the weak, right?
No.
It takes a long time. It takes, like I showed, the Civil Rights Campaign was a 10-year campaign, right? It takes a long time. And so you continually have to be in the fight. And I like what Stephanie said about, coming from a different angle, because that is what it's about. And we're talking a lot about organizing, but I just want to put it out there that, we do look sometimes like we're oppositional, but at the same time, I want it to be known that, to get it done and to be effective, you don't necessarily have to you just have to hold people accountable. And there's a lot of planning that goes into it. It's not just like we're showing up at a building tomorrow, you know what I mean? So I just wanted to put that out there, that it takes a lot of time, a lot of planning, a lot of door-to-doors, a lot of survey, a lot of conversations and relationship building that really goes into the process to actually get things done. So,
All right, so she went there a little bit. No, the real thing that we need to pay attention to is that we are, as community organizations, and all of us in this room, if you're not right there in the inner circle of all these decisions that are made, we have this trickle-down information that we have to react to. Your points are exactly what I'm talking about, exactly what I wanted to hit with you too, is that we need to find all those different avenues to get the information before it becomes something we're reacting to. So that's going to be that bind that we can work with developers, we can work with people, and we can have, the senior citizen, like, oh, you ain't gonna change the time of your meeting, but we gonna damn sure have somebody there at that
Right.
time.
Yeah.
We gonna, for everything that comes up that we know is gonna happen, instead of, they're gonna build a save-a-lot right there tomorrow. Now we have to figure out what to do, and it becomes a process, and it's a long fight. So what is that process? I don't know, but that's what we should all be fighting for, is to make sure all the information isn't just on the web, because folks don't even understand the language that's coming through their TV screens in my neighborhood, so the web is not going to help them out one bit. It should be on a universal scale. So.
Many of the folks that you're talking about, and many of the folks that we know, are thinking of in a mindset of what they don't have and what they can't do, and this doesn't happen, and a negative standpoint. What all of us are doing in our regular lives are talking about the paradigm shift of looking at a community as an asset. So when a developer, and you're not a bad person, because technically I'm a developer, I guess.
Right.
I'm not a bad person. But when you think about when someone's coming into your neighborhood, they've looked at your neighborhood as a certain way. So they see vacant lots and they're like, this is an opportunity for me, for my pocket, to be able to put in something. And if you're saying, well, how do I know when that happens, and where do I need to be, and how come sometimes it's already too late? One of the challenges that many of you will have to face and have to think about, people's basic needs need to be met first before they can even think about going at 8:15 in the morning to protest against a store. And a lot of things that we haven't realized is that when we do outreach, some of the language, some folks still can't read. And so you'll say, well, I did outreach and I had a community meeting at a time that wasn't convenient. And then or they'll do it in a way that makes it seem like everyone's talking over your head. You don't even feel like you belong or you're at the table. You have to be able to teach each one and be a representative of the community and say, I'm going to be there. I'm going to figure out a way to make sure someone is there to understand what they need and to stop the community from thinking what we don't have. You have to tell people saying, no, we have a good community here. Yeah, it might have some vacant lots. Okay, but that's what we have. That's peace and quiet. Right? That's the best neighbors ever. So you need to start thinking what we don't have so that when a developer comes, they don't get this impression that this is a community with low self-esteem. They don't believe in themselves. They gave up. You need to start saying, no, we haven't given up. This is what we're doing. And it takes some investment on everybody's part to show a community that is not dying out. And I think, from looking at the community at large, some parts in the east side have said, well, you know what, we're waiting for someone else. So that community is waiting for someone to take advantage of them. You need to go in and say, no, you're not waiting. You can do this yourself, and this costs $0 to you. And you shouldn't be waiting for the developer because I've got money in mind. I'm going to make some money. So you have to let me know, am I going to make money in this neighborhood or not? That's what it really boils down to. I don't know.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is our fourth. We have a couple more short stops and then a final sort of celebration, I think, of the work you've done. There's 100 in the room, 200 signed up for this round. It's all kind of a web opportunity in relationship to that, and certainly that's not an answer to everything. You, talking to other colleagues, we're going to bring this around next year. Your voices, the way you've expressed them, have been captured. And what I have to say to you is that from our perspective, the difference between us teaching school and us going to school with you has been fantastic. I mean, the expression of knowledge and the deep structure and the questions that you're asking are precisely the sort of shared learning that we started this for. And so I thank you, and I think everyone who comes after you thanks you for the kind of contribution and the quality of conversations we've been able to generate here. I just want to take a couple of summary statements out of all of this, and this is not at all comprehensive, so forgive me for all of it. But me and you versus us. It's like benchmarking. You go back to 1994 when we held our first downtown summit. 300 people, it was televised, it was on the radio, we had phone banks. The concluding statement from one of the participants who came, hearing people over and over talk about us and them, saying, there ain't no us and them, it's only we. Pay attention. Just absolutely bedrock, old school, but very strong. And then your notion about get there before the money, like, wow. Think about what's going on. I'll just use Buffalo as an example, but I think it works in almost everywhere we go. The modest amount of infrastructure that goes into Ohio Street and those small parks, and then think of the ripples through a neighborhood and series of neighborhoods that haven't had anything touch them in a long time. That's promise. That's building on the strength of the river and remediation and ecology and sustainability, but taking it to the neighborhood in a slow growth way. Think about the counterintuitive move by one of those sneaky Petes who ran out there and bought that Larkin building, put 600,000 square feet on the market with not a single sign up, changed the paradigm in money, and is now kind of rippling out like a stone in the pool in a neighborhood that hasn't seen much investment in a very long time. Get there before the money. those kinds of things. Look at Central Park Plaza and the interest surrounding that, but imagine what's going to happen south and east of that neighborhood with those investments. So there's ways in which Sneaky Pete can really be your friend, but you got to work it. And then also sometimes Sneaky Pete is the government, right? It's oh, that's a road project. That's changing a truck route for industry into a boulevard for citizens and neighbors. That's a public investment, another package. So follow the money, get there before them, so the gentrification pays back to your community in a way that we can all collectively take advantage of it. The proactive education piece, both of you raised, is of course what we're doing here. And I want to say, we chose our words for this effort very carefully. We said citizen, we said planning, and we said school. We could have said learning, might have been better. But citizen planning, learning didn't quite do it for us, so we said school. But citizen is both individual and collective at the same time. It's we. And planning is both kind of suggestive of this noun, this thing that we have to get intimate with, we have to know about, and it's a verb. And what Eisenhower told us, and we presented in our first talk, was, it ain't the plan, it's the planning, because that's what takes us to school every time. So we heard some numbers over the course of the last 4 sessions. 4,000 people played in the Buffalo Green Club. They were on the maps, drawing, telling us about their neighborhood, learning about other neighborhoods, and connecting the dots. 6,000 people played in Buffalo's comprehensive plan. Another 6,000 played in the Regional Economic Development Council. And that's just 3 of hundreds and hundreds of plans across our region that have all been open to the public. So an aggressive engagement of, don't just go to school, go to plan, go to planning, and get your fingers on these things. Because that's part of the way we build not just 100 at a time, although that's very important, or 200 at a time. It's the way we're going to build a whole lot more. So it's, again, very exciting. I do want to go to one kind of simple point that sounds logical, but I want to test it, and it comes from your observation, which is this notion of draining people and money to the suburbs. I have talked to a lot of town and village supervisors who feel broke and think the only way they can get unbroke is to get another increment of taxes from some further development. It's a legitimate concern. They're not able to deliver the services they want. But the real cost of that development ultimately is going to be borne by that municipality, because they won't be able to maintain what is given to them in roads and initial infrastructure investments, because the maintenance cost on that stuff is way more than they're going to get back in tax base. So at some level, if we stop thinking it's their fault or our fault, and we start framing the we at a regional scale, which is really, I think, at the core of your observation, we really find a way to say, wait a minute, maybe if we follow that money, people can have all the choices, but they have to pay the real cost for choices. And if you're paying the real cost for choices, you're not taking what Jason described as the externality and giving that to the public and maintaining the quality internally for the private. You've got to be able to pay the real cost for the quality and the choices you make. And if we're about anything, I think it's about a kind of democratic approach to getting to the choices we make publicly. So sprawl's a public choice. We choose it. We could choose differently. Anyway, I just think this is a fantastic, fun thing to do. I really thank this panel, and please thank them for me.
Thank you.